I trudged home that evening, bone-tired from work, fantasizing about nothing more than collapsing on my balcony with an ice-cold drink in hand. But as I neared my front door, something odd snagged my attention, a letter plastered to the wood with an excessive amount of blue tape, fluttering faintly in the evening breeze. My stomach sank. I recognized that tape. Notices from the HOA always arrived like ominous decrees from some authoritarian regime. With a groan, I tore it off and unfolded the paper. As my eyes skimmed the text, my face twisted from exhaustion to sheer incredulity. Effective immediately, your balcony has been designated as community property. My mouth went dry. I reread it, slower this time, hoping I'd misunderstood. Nope. Your balcony is now available for all residents to enjoy at their discretion. Homeowners must not restrict access. A hollow laugh escaped me. Surely this was a joke. But there it was, stark and absurd in black ink. My private balcony, attached to my private apartment, was now public territory. The ridiculousness nearly made me chuckle, but then fury surged in. Who had the audacity to claim my balcony? Who even had the power to draft this nonsense? My mind zeroed in on one name, Linda, the HOA president. She was the self-crowned ruler of our complex, a woman intoxicated by her own authority. Linda had a talent for inventing rules that served no one but herself. Last month, she'd banned doormats that didn't meet her aesthetic standards. Before that, she'd pushed for mandatory neutral-colored curtains. And now, apparently, she'd decided my balcony was communal real estate. Fuming, I stormed over to the HOA office, my irritation simmering just below the surface. The little glass-walled space oozed fake professionalism, meant to seem inviting but reeking of hostility. Linda sat behind the desk, typing with an air of profound self-importance. When she spotted me, she flashed a patronizing smile. "Oh, Michael," she said, as if she'd been awaiting my arrival. "What can I do for you?" I slapped the letter onto her desk. "You can explain this. Preferably in a way that doesn't sound insane." She barely glanced at it. "Oh, yes, that's the new policy we voted on. Your balcony has the best view in the complex, and we decided it should be shared." "Shared?" I echoed, incredulous. "It's my property. I pay for it. It's part of my unit." Linda gave me a pitying look, like I was some dim-witted kid who didn't grasp the rules of her kingdom. "Yes, but it's visible from common areas, and many residents feel it would enhance the community experience if everyone could use it." I stared at her, grappling with the sheer lunacy of her words. "So, you all just voted to take my property?" "Not take, Michael," she corrected, folding her hands like a benevolent tyrant. "Repurpose. It's a small sacrifice for the greater good." Rage bubbled up inside me. "Let's test that logic. What if we vote to repurpose your living room? I bet the community would love a new hangout spot." Her expression darkened. "That's absurd." "Yeah, it is," I snapped, just like this. She let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind people use when they think they're the only mature one present. "I understand this is a tough adjustment, but the decision's final. It's in the bylaws now." I took a slow breath, forcing calm. "So, you're saying random people can waltz onto my balcony whenever they feel like it?" "Yes," she replied coolly. "And if I tell them to get lost?" "That'd violate the new community agreement," she said, her smile unwavering. "We'd have to fine you." I wanted to argue, to shred the letter in her smug face, but I knew battling her in her little fiefdom wouldn't change a thing. So I forced a tight smile. "Got it. Thanks for clearing that up." Linda beamed, clearly thinking she'd won. "Glad we could chat, Michael." I turned and left. By the time I got back to my place, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the molten anger coursing through me. And as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, I stepped onto my balcony to find a middle-aged couple I'd never seen before lounging there, gazing at the view like tourists. The man turned, grinned, and raised his drink in a lazy toast. "Nice spot you've got here." My jaw tightened. "Yeah, I know." His wife waved at the chair I'd bought with my own money. "You don't mind if we sit, right?" "Linda said this is open to all residents now." I gripped the doorframe so hard my knuckles whitened. "Actually, I do mind." The man chuckled, like I'd told a cute little quip. "Well, rules are rules. Don't want to ruffle the HOA's feathers." Something in me snapped, not violently, but in a way that felt sharper, more cunning. I had two paths. waste months fighting this madness through complaints and appeals, or take control myself. If Linda and her cronies wanted my balcony to be public, fine. I'd make sure no one ever wanted to step foot on it again. I glanced at the couple, still smugly enjoying my space, and smiled. "You're right," I said, my tone deceptively light. "Rules are rules." Then I went inside, grabbed my keys, and headed out. I had shopping to do. The drive to the store was oddly serene. Not the peace of surrender, but the calm before chaos. My plan was already forming. I wasn't just aiming for petty revenge. I was going to ensure no one dared mess with me again. The HOA had started a war, and I was about to strike back. I found what I needed at a quirky shop on the outskirts of town, the kind that sold everything from rusty lamps to bizarre knickknacks. Wandering the dusty aisles, I spotted them. Mannequins. Dozens of them, frozen in eerie poses, their blank faces staring into oblivion. Some were pristine, others chipped or missing limbs, but all were perfect. The cashier raised an eyebrow as I hauled a cartful to the counter. "Opening a boutique?" he asked, half serious. I grinned. "Something like that." I crammed them into my car, their featureless faces peeking out the windows, and imagined Linda's horror when she saw them. Back home, I got to work. I hauled each mannequin onto my balcony, arranging them with precision. Some stood rigid by the railing, others sprawled in my chairs. One with a cracked face and a missing eye went right by the sliding door, like a silent sentinel. It was creepy enough, but I wasn't done. Digging through an old box of Halloween decorations, I found masks, wigs, and sunglasses. Soon, my balcony transformed from a community space into a nightmare scene. A tattered wig crowned one figure in wild disarray. A clown mask grinned grotesquely from another. I draped an old coat over a third, making it look disturbingly lifelike in the shadows. Stepping back, I felt a rush of satisfaction I hadn't known since this HOA fiasco began. I kept my apartment dark, watching from inside as the first visitor approached, a woman I vaguely recalled as one of Linda's lackeys, strolling up with a coffee in hand. She froze mid-step, staring up at my balcony. From below, the mannequins must have looked like a silent, menacing crowd. She hesitated, then scurried off at double speed, shuddering. I smirked. It only got better. That evening, the same nosy couple who'd invaded my space returned, strutting up like they owned it. But when they saw the motionless figures in the gloom, the woman yelped, clutching her husband's arm. He squinted, mumbling, "Are those?" before trailing off. They lingered awkwardly on the sidewalk, then slunk away, glancing back nervously. I had to stifle a laugh. By morning, my plan was in full swing. Word spread fast in the complex. People avoided my balcony like it was cursed. Some crossed the street rather than pass beneath it. It was glorious. Then Linda arrived. I spotted her from my window, marching up with her usual imperious stride. But when she reached the base of my balcony and saw my art exhibit, she stopped dead. Her mouth fell open, and for once, her smug mask slipped, replaced by unease, maybe even fear. I slid the door open and leaned on the railing. "Morning, Linda," I called casually. Her eyes flicked between me and the mannequins. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice pitching up. "This?" I waved vaguely at my setup. "Just some decor. Thought I'd lean into the whole community vibe." Her lips thinned. "This is unacceptable." "Why?" I asked, feigning innocence. "HOA rules don't mention mannequins." She opened her mouth, then shut it, visibly wrestling for a response. She wanted to order them gone, but she'd boxed herself in. If she admitted they freaked people out, she'd have to concede forcing strangers onto my balcony was a flop too. Finally, she huffed, "This isn't in the spirit of community sharing." I nodded. "Totally agree. But I'd hate to make anyone uncomfortable in their own neighborhood. Should I bring this up at the next HOA meeting?" Her eye twitched. She knew I'd outmaneuvered her. "Enjoy your day, Linda," I added, retreating inside. She stood there, fists balled, then stormed off. This wasn't over. She wasn't one to quit, but I'd landed the first blow, and she hadn't seen it coming. The next morning, retaliation hit. Another letter was taped to my door, this time stamped notice of violation in bold red. I yanked it off and read, "Balcony spaces must maintain a welcoming and aesthetically pleasing environment for the community." I laughed outright. It was a flimsy, desperate move to oust my mannequins without admitting her blunder. Linda couldn't back down, so she was rewriting the game. I grabbed a pen, flipped the paper, and scrawled in big letters, "Define aesthetically pleasing." Then I taped it back to my door and went about my day. By noon, Linda was back, pounding on my door. I opened it, leaning casually against the frame as she stood there, arms crossed, lips practically vanishing into a scowl. "This isn't funny, Michael," she snapped. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "I'm just following the rules." She thrust another notice at me. "Your decorations violate HOA policy." I skimmed it and smirked. "Oh, now they're decorations? I thought this was about a welcoming community space." Her nostrils flared. "The HOA board has deemed your mannequins inappropriate." I tilted my head. "So, are there specific guidelines on decorations? A list of what's allowed?" She faltered, and I saw the trap click shut. "There are general standards," she hedged. "Great," I said. "I'd love to see them. Shouldn't be an issue if we're playing by the rules, right?" She glared. "You need to take them down, Michael." I shrugged. "Unless there's a rule banning mannequins, I think I'll keep them." Her jaw clenched. "You're making this personal." I smiled. "Linda, you made it personal when you tried to steal my balcony." She took a sharp breath, struggling to stay composed. "Fine. If you won't cooperate, the HOA will escalate this." I nodded. "Can't wait." She spun and marched off, but I knew she'd be back with something new. I was almost excited to see her next move. It didn't take long. The next day, a maintenance crew rolled up, milling around uncertainly below my balcony. I stepped outside and leaned on the railing. "Can I help you guys?" The supervisor scratched his head, glancing up. We got a work order to remove those." He waved at the mannequins. I raised an eyebrow. "Work order from who?" He checked his clipboard, hesitating. "The HOA." I smiled. "Got signed approval from the homeowner?" He frowned. No." I nodded. "Then you might want to leave before I call the cops for trespassing." They exchanged looks, then the supervisor sighed and waved them off. Linda had tried sending muscle without checking her legal footing, her first slip-up. Her second came that evening with another notice, this one threatening a $50 daily fine until the mannequins were gone. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I went shopping again. If Linda wanted war, I'd escalate. At a thrift store, I snagged more mannequins and jazzed them up, cheap motorized turntables to make a few rotate slowly, plus tiny speakers hidden in the plants, whispering faintly every few minutes. Subtle, but unnerving. By nightfall, my balcony wasn't a shared space anymore, it was a horror show. The effect was instant. A jogger paused that night, gawked at the eerie display, and bolted when a mannequin turned. I nearly spilled my drink laughing. Next morning, Linda returned with backup. HOA board members, all sporting matching frowns. They weren't here to talk, they were here to dictate. I stepped out with my coffee, unfazed. Linda pointed up. "This is harassment, Michael." I tilted my head. "Harassment? I'm just decorating my private property." An older board member with a perpetual scowl coughed. "Mr. Michael, we've had complaints about your display." I smiled. "Complaints? I thought this was a shared space. People should enjoy it, right?" Linda's jaw tightened. "You know what you're doing." I sipped my coffee. "And yet, I'm not breaking any rules." They muttered among themselves, aware I had them cornered. If they pushed, I could sue, and they knew it. The scowling man sighed. "We'll revisit the policy next meeting." Linda whirled on him. "We can't let this stand." He shot her a look. "We have to follow our own rules, Linda." I grinned. "Now you're getting it." Her face flushed, but she had no retort. She stormed off, the board trailing behind. The war wasn't over, but I'd just won a major round, and Linda knew it. Days later, the quiet felt ominous. Linda wasn't licking her wounds, she was scheming. Sure enough, a thick envelope slid under my door, a legal complaint from the HOA, claiming my mannequins disrupted community standards. They wanted fines and a court order to remove them. I laughed. It was so predictable. Linda couldn't win outright, so she was drowning me in red tape. The claims were weak, all vague nonsense about distress and property values. She'd underestimated me if she thought I'd cave. I called a lawyer buddy from college. He chuckled at the papers. "They've got nothing. It's a bluff. But if you want to mess with them, push back." Oh, I did. I filed a counterclaim. Harassment, selective enforcement, unenforceable rules, and demanded proof of past aesthetic crackdowns. I knew Linda's rules were ad hoc vendettas. When the HOA got my response, Linda lost it. She showed up at my door, red-faced and frazzled. "We need to talk," she snapped. I leaned against the frame. "Go ahead." She took a breath. "The HOA doesn't want a legal fight, but you need to be reasonable. The mannequins are upsetting people." I smirked. "Upsetting how?" "They're silent, still, and block nothing." Her jaw tightened. "You know what you're doing." I shrugged. "If it's not against a rule, what's the issue?" She glared. "Fine. What'll it take to get them down?" I pretended to mull it over. "Simple. Give me my balcony back. Revoke the community property rule, in writing." She blinked. "That's not how this works." I smiled. "Then the mannequins stay." She exhaled hard. "Michael, this isn't just about you." I cut her off. "You mean your HOA clique?" "Because no one else seems to care." She wanted to argue, but didn't. Instead, she stepped back. "If that's your stance, so be it." She left, but I knew she'd try something else. That something was an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers went up, vaguely promising a respectful community environment. I knew it was about me. I arrived early, watching the room fill. Linda sat up front, tense despite her confident facade. The board looked jittery. They'd bet on the wrong side. Linda opened with her usual spiel about community values, subtly targeting me without naming names. But when she rushed to vote on disruptive balcony decor, I raised my hand. "Can you specify what activities are harming well-being?" She sighed. "Go ahead." The board squirmed. "Your mannequins," one admitted. I nodded. "And which rule bans them?" Linda's lips thinned. "We're reviewing guidelines." I smiled. "So, I haven't broken anything?" Silence. She was losing the room, and she knew it. I leaned back. "Since we're reviewing, let's revisit the balcony rule too. People trespassing on my property's more disruptive than mannequins." Whispers spread. Linda's control slipped. The scowling board member sighed. "We'll consider all concerns next meeting." I smirked. Looking forward to it. The meeting ended with no decisions, but I'd won the real fight. Linda's HOA was cracking, and she'd lost her grip. I walked out savoring it. The end was near.